Okay, now I'm just waiting for Sheva Marcus. Okay, I hope you guys are finding this amusing. So I'm finding it frustrating. Let me tell her. Please join again now. Okay. Oh my God, I'm there. It's working, but Sheva Marcus is not here. Now I need Sheva Marcus. Oh, good, admit. Okay. Wow. Okay, welcome to a special edition of the Rabbi Shmuley podcast. We finally got everything to work, I'm pretty sure.
Third time is a charm? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, well, we don't want a third time chazaka of this thing failing.
Okay, fine.
We want it to work. So I think it is streaming now, right? Do you see that?
I didn't, I gave up following.
Oh, you're afraid to look as you're going to jinx it? Maybe we'll jinx it.
That's what I'm afraid. Honestly, I'm not seeing it, but.
No, I'm seeing it. It's there.
Good. So then you're better than I at this, and I'm just not seeing it. Oh, wait, let me go.
No, it's working. I saw it. Okay.
I see it. I see it.
So apologies to anyone who had to wait. And I want to welcome renowned therapist Sheva Marcus for joining me to discuss something. Actually, it's much better that we were a little bit delayed, 20 minutes delayed, because this is really a subject that this is like an after dark kind of discussion. Sexual fantasy and its role in relationships and its role in kosher sex, because I'm only interested in kosher sex. I'm assuming that Sheva's only interested in kosher sex. Kosher sex is sex that leads to intimacy, to connectedness, to togetherness, to oneness. Is that a fair assumption that you're out to promote kosher sex?
That I'm that's a complicated question. I think it's a complicated question. I think the word holiness is a very heavy word. So I
didn't say holiness. I didn't say holiness. I thought
connection.
I said wholeness and connection. Sorry.
I think that as a sex therapist, I respond to different people in different ways, depending on what they're looking for. But for the purposes of tonight's conversation, I think we're looking at people who are interested in long-term monogamous relationships that are meaningful. So can we agree to that definition?
Yeah, no, but that's exactly right.
Perfect. Okay. That doesn't, I, as a professional, I see people who are interested in different things, and I need to respect that as well. So I just.
No, as do I. I'm not myopic or closed-minded about the modern world and how not everybody is going to be married, and we're not looking at a religious definition of kosher sex. As I said, my definition of kosher sex is sex that leads to intimacy, to connectedness. And of course, we're interested in monogamy and exclusivity, even outside of the framework of traditional marriage. But the moral implications of kosher sex transcend just religion. The fact is that monogamy, exclusivity, not being duplicitous, trying to share more of your innermost self with someone is something that I think is universally regarded by secular and religious alike, right?
By much of the population, but not all the population. So, but let's use that definition for tonight. How's that work?
No, it works for me.
Perfect. Tonight we're discussing what you call kosher sex, and I'm good with that.
Well, I think fantasy is a fascinating subject because our most vital and most central sexual organ is right here, right? It's our mind, and the role of fantasy has always been diminished. We see so much emphasis put on physical appearance and looking great. We see a lot of emphasis being put on performance and sexual experience. We see a lot of emphasis being put on novelty. People love new bodies. We see a lot of emphasis put on the visual, especially when it comes to porn, which I think is actually a harmful visual. But we don't see a lot of emphasis put on fantasy. When it comes to male fantasy, it's been reduced to like 4 or 5 different sexual positions in this degrading pornographic universe. And when it comes to female sexual fantasy, it's barely been regarded at all. It really.
Can we just define for each other what we're saying when we talk about fantasies? Because I think fantasy can mean a lot of different things, and I want to make sure you and I are using the terms the same way, because otherwise we'll be having conversations kind of.
Well, why don't you define it first, Sheva?
So in general, I think of fantasy as anything that's going on exactly as you said in your brain, which gets you turned on. That's fantasy. But I think that we need to separate out fantasies, the kind of fantasy that you actually maybe want to have in your life. So for example, you may want to fantasize about going on a vacation, right? Or you might want to fantasize about having sex in the shower, right? But that's very different from a fantasy about, going to Mars, or a fantasy of having a threesome, right? There are some fantasies that we use the same term, but they're very different things, right? A fantasy, that's something that I wish I could do and I want to do and I would like to do. And another fantasy, which is something that just lives in my brain and turns me on as a brain. So those are two already separate definitions that I think we need to address. And I'll add on top of that subsets of fantasies, the kind of fantasies that you live in your brain, some fantasies you actually actively bring on. Like some couples like sharing fantasies. So people will make up stories or talk to each other. And those are fantasies that you are using, that you are bringing in to turn yourself on and turn somebody else, as opposed to the fantasies that tend to just make their way through your brain. So I do think that there's differences. And I think that if we address those differences, we can have a better conversation. Is that fair?
Sure.
Okay.
So let's immediately discuss non-erotic fantasy. We're clearly not talking about fantasies about.
Well, I didn't mean any, not all of those are erotic. I meant fantasies that you would like to actualize. I just used the vacation idea as an example. Fantasies that you want to actualize versus fantasies that you don't really want to actualize. The fantasies that you have no havamina, right? There's never an idea that you'll actually actualize them. Those are very different kind of fantasies.
So you're distinguishing between fantasies that are going to lead to some kind of practice versus fantasies that are totally outside the realm of possibility.
Correct.
Right? Okay.
I think that's a really critical. I think that's a really critical distinction. And as we talk, I think you'll probably agree.
And I think we should also distinguish between fantasies about others and fantasies about our spouse, right?
Oh, for sure, we should. But that. Right. But I feel like that goes back to the heart of that conversation about what are you actually really fantasizing about, because I know that's what you have an issue with. So, so where do you want? So I sort of stole the mic and I apologize. You were trying to.
No, let's just go to the basics. Sexual fantasy and erotic fantasy is critical for erotic passion, because as I said, our principal sexual organ is actually our mind. It's not our genitalia, it's not other body parts, it's actually our mind. And the mind has the capacity to make a relationship new at all times. So
can I throw an addendum in there? I just need to put a little asterisk in. Sure. Am I bothering you that I keep throwing asterisks?
Not at all. That's the whole
okay, I just need to say that the center I run, Maze Sexual Health, it's a medical center, and we are understanding more and more how critical hormones are. I just need to throw that in. And the hormones therefore then affect your brain as well. So this dichotomy between the mind and the body, not so clear to me. And I think that we do a much better job if we understand that they bounce off each other. So I just need to say that because that's the world I live in. So, okay.
You think, well, that's an interesting comment. You think there are hormones that actually affect?
Oh, I don't think. I know. There's tons of data
that shows that there are hormones that affect whether we have fantasies or the degree of our fantasies.
No, well, yes. There are hormones that have a direct impact. Both, let's take testosterone. It's the most obvious. Has direct impact on men's sexual desire and women's sexual desire, and you can't separate desire from fantasies. So, I mean, you can, but it's not super helpful. So, so that somebody who is on a hormone is much more likely to be able to access their fantasy life. And that's there's data on that. So just.
No, I'm not. Yeah. No,
but again, it's the brain. Yeah.
I accept that. I'm in no way looking to distinguish between the mind and the body when it comes to sex. I'm doing precisely the opposite. What I'm saying is that our principal sexual organ is actually our mind. It cannot be divorced. The two cannot be separated. So often we think that we can almost mentally decapitate our bodies from our minds when it comes to sex. And I agree with you that cannot be done, that sex is a much more holistic experience. So I'm not surprised to hear there are hormones you're saying there are hormones that impact desire, and desire impacts directly on fantasy, of course. the person who's not feeling sexual isn't going to fantasize about sex.
Right. Or the reverse. The hormones affect the brain that make you want to fantasize and that make you want to have sex. They happen almost simultaneously. So great. So we both agree on that.
Right. So let's just begin with marriage for a second. You can fantasize about strangers and you can fantasize about your spouse. And when it comes to your spouse, you can fantasize about you and your spouse, and you can also fantasize about your spouse and someone else. I find that in the counseling that I do, that novelty is extremely important in all sexual relationships. But so often what we do is we look for novelty through new bodies, whether it's people having affairs, which are very destructive to a marriage, or whether it's singles who are bed hopping and having and hooking up, which is going to do little to foster intimacy or a wholesome relationship, or through an addiction to porn, where you're not really meeting or you're being exposed to an actual body, but it's more of a fantasy body. When people say to me that they need novelty, I often encourage them to use sexual fantasy, even if it's their spouse with someone else, as long as they divulge that to their spouse. I see no real harm in that. I see harm when a spouse is fantasizing about someone else that isn't their spouse. So I'd love for you to comment on that.
Right. So I think that is probably the point where we disagree is, and I totally disagree. I feel like any fantasy in the use of having a better sex life with your partner is seriously important. And I also understand that novelty, as you said, is extremely important, and novelty of other people as well. And we don't want you to be going off and having sex with somebody else, because we've committed and we've started this conversation that we're dealing with people to whom monogamy is important. And so rather than running off with somebody else, having a fantasy in your brain of somebody else, and here is where I think the crux is, we have lost the ability to understand that fantasy is just fantasy. Right? There's nothing real about the person that you're fantasizing about. You're choosing to have sex with your partner. You're just thinking about this other person in order to make the sex with your partner better. That's all you're doing. And it's usually not even.
You don't think that involves some kind of mental cheating?
Like, no,
let me just advance the point. I've counseled many couples where wives complain tremendously that their husband is physically present and mentally absent during sex, that he's thinking about someone else. And if you're a guy who is visiting, the planet of the nymphobabes while having sex with your wife, if you think your wife doesn't know, then you're an idiot, because she knows that you're not there. And I think in many women find that even more insulting than not even having sex. You're saying better to have sex with your spouse, even if you're fantasizing about someone else. But I know a lot of women that say to me, I don't want to have sex with my husband or my boyfriend or my partner when he's thinking about someone else. That's a downright insult. He's being excited by something he just saw on TV, or the porn that he just downloaded an hour ago, or some actress that he likes, or some
and I think the thinking has to change. I think the thinking has to change, and does change. And honestly, I think you can see this sharper with the women, honestly, to be honest with you, because what happens is, you're saying women are complaining that the husbands are thinking about somebody else, but I feel like they're conditioned to do that. And the reality is that when you look at monogamy is way harder on women. The data shows that monogamy is women's desire drops precipitously in long-term monogamous relationships. So does men's a little bit, but not nearly the way women's does. Men often approach it, deal with it by either going to porn or having affairs. Women just lose desire. What we see in relationships where the women don't have desire. So the fantasy is super important for women, super important, and can save the sex in the relationship. And the truth is, I think that is absolutely true. And the only reason I feel like women often feel resentful is because on some level, they've sort of twisted in their head that their husband would really, really rather be having sex in the planet of the nymphomaniacs. But the truth is, their husband wouldn't rather be having sex in the planet of the nymphomaniacs. I mean, some of them maybe, but most of them want to be having sex with the woman that they married who they love, but they want to keep having good sex with her. And so if their brain slides in and out every once in a while to the planet of the nymphomaniacs, or they build her into the planet of the nymphomaniacs, ma tovu manaim. I think that's amazing. Anything people do that makes the sex hotter between the couple is, as far as I'm concerned, has my blessing. And I feel like it is the most powerful way. It is the most powerful way to keep the sex alive, is to allow people to fantasize. People trying to control people's fantasies is just spinning in the wind
Okay.
and not useful.
This is a great debate. So let's engage it even further. I'm speaking to renowned sexual therapist Sheva Marcus. You'll see a lot of her material on kosher.sex, built by my daughter Chana, who would have been part of this
or at Dr. Batsheva on Instagram or Facebook.
Okay.
So
Dr. Batsheva, Instagram and Facebook.
Dr. Batsheva, yeah.
So that's BATSHEVA. Okay. So speaking about Sheva Marcus, this is a great debate. I vehemently and passionately and respectfully disagree. You know, when I published Kosher Sex 20 years ago, one of the things that made the biggest impact on women and wives who read it, and it was probably, you know, the data kind of showed that it was a 60-40 split of women to men reading the book. One of the things that made the biggest impact was wives and women saying, what a beautiful thing that Jewish law actually prohibits a man from thinking about another woman while making love to his wife, that's a sin. Now, why did they like that? Because most religions would say, as you just said, whatever goes on in your brain, as long as you're not doing it, as long as there's no action, especially Judaism kind of emphasizes that, you know, Hamasu Ikar, that action is everything. So why would God give one darn what's going on in your brain? Answer, because it's not enough just to have passionate sex. That's only one part of the equation. You know, kosher sex is passion and intimacy. When you say that it makes no difference to me what instigates passionate sex or what the catalyst is, even if it's thinking about a lot of other women, your coworker, some porn person you saw, the wives do care. I don't think they're conditioned to care. I think that the absence of intimacy is actually human deprivation. I think people naturally feel deprived. I think a woman who feels that her body is being used almost as in almost a masturbatory way for a guy, that he's using.
But you are making such a huge leap. That is a huge leap for a man to make a decision that this is the woman I love and this is the woman I want to have sex with twice a week for whatever, 50, 60 years, you know. That is the big leap. And that is the really meaningful, powerful piece of it. And at some of the times that it is so unrealistic and also so unhealthy, I think, to suggest that every single time he's having sex, he needs to be thinking about his wife and only his wife. It's so unrealistic. I need to tell you a story. I had a patient.
But it's just as unrealistic to say that he's only going to have sex with his wife. Then I mean,
no,
let's follow.
And I also disagree with you on the sources that you said where Judaism says you can't.
Let's just take one disagreement at a time.
Okay.
Following your logic to its natural conclusion, if it's unrealistic to expect that monogamy will be passionate in thought, speech, and action, which I understand, and many people would agree with you, then I think it's the logical conclusion is that monogamy is kind of outdated anyway.
No, I think monogamy.
Just 1 second. That's the prevailing thinking these days. I love going to Iceland, one of my favorite places in the world. Can't visit in COVID-19. The Scandinavian countries in general, and Iceland in particular, they live in a post-monogamous world. It doesn't mean they believe in cheating, and they don't believe in threesomes and menage a trois. They believe in what really is serial monogamy. They believe that relationships can last a good 8 to 10 years. You can squeeze a good 8 to 10 years of passion out of a relationship. But expecting it to have great sex or any kind of sex after that. I mean, you just said twice a week. You know the national average is once a week. So sex once a week. Why don't we kind of just give up on monogamy in general? I'm not saying we should cheat, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have stable families. Places like Iceland, they think that they are making a lot of sense. Expect a relationship to last about 10 years and focus on the stability of the children, and afterwards agree to parent and everything together. And they make that argument very passionately. So I put it to you, if you think that our minds can't remain monogamous, why do you think our bodies can't?
Because you and I are defining our minds being monogamous very differently. And that's why, because I think the decision to be with one person and only be with that person is your body, but that is also your mind. But that doesn't mean that that's what your mind has to be thinking of all the time. And quite frankly, if a guy's thinking about Angelina Jolie, it's really not that different than if he's thinking about a Martian from outer space. It really isn't, because it's not actually Angelina Jolie. It's just this idea of Angelina Jolie that's turning him on at the moment, right? And what's fascinating to me is that Jewish source you said where you know it's halachically not okay, or by Jewish law it's not okay to be thinking about somebody else. It actually, if you go back at the source, it says you can't be sleeping with somebody as a substitute for somebody else. It can't be that I really, really want to be with Sarah. That Sarah's who I want to be with, but Sarah's not available. She's married to somebody else, and therefore I'm stuck with Leah, and I'm having sex with Leah, and I'm thinking about Sarah all the time.
That's covetousness. That's
that is a
that's
totally different thing
That's a
than,
different law. That's a different law. That's the 10th commandment, that you can't covet someone else's
no,
wife.
I'm not talking about coveting. I'm talking about the source that you're talking about not,
What I'm talking about is an actual law that I think was so
you,
prescient.
that you can't have sex.
You cannot use your wife
Yes.
for sex.
Yes.
You're feeling horny and you're not being turned on by her. You're not interested in her.
But you are, by definition, when you're having sex.
Let's take this word that I don't even often say it. Let's take the word horny, which kind of comes from the word hormonal. It really connotes a guy or a woman who's being propelled by hormones to have sex, not through being turned on by someone, not through erotic attraction to someone. You're not being pulled to someone.
Oh my God, that is such.
You're being pushed by your hormones.
You are splitting out.
Just to finish this thought, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with that, but we can hardly say it's intimate. So when you tell me that wives don't care about,
we can say it's intimate.
I don't think that's true at all. From my experience of counseling hundreds of couples, you've probably counseled hundreds and thousands of couples. You want to tell me that the average wife would say to you, I couldn't care less if my husband is actually climaxing to the thought of some female coworker from the office and is using my body to achieve climax while being mentally focused on someone else? Women would really say that?
So it's such a funny way that you're asking that question, because I will tell you that most women have what I would call an orgasm fantasy. And usually it's not thinking about the guy that's under them or over them at that moment. Okay. That is the reality of the things that turn us on. What our erotic brain uses at any moment switches back and forth constantly. And so I want to tell you a very interesting, I had a patient who came in who we were talking about, her libido was low, and we're talking about her fantasizing about other people, fantasizing other places, other people. And she said to me, she started to cry, and she said, well, I feel guilty fantasizing about other people. And I said, okay, well, why is that? And she said, well, I'm afraid my husband may be thinking about other people sometimes. Exactly your point. And then I'm like, okay, and you think that every time you have sex, your husband should only be thinking about you? And there was a moment of silence, and she has a grown-up daughter. And I said, your daughter's dating somebody right now, right? She's having sex with this guy. If they get married, do you want her to only think about him every single time they have sex? And do you expect him that he will only think about her every single time they have sex? And she started to laugh. She said, well, then I think he's a little bit of a psychopath. It is what you are doing is splitting apart. When you say there's a hormone drive or a mental drive or an intimacy drive, those things are all interlinked. It all starts with the decision that you, my spouse, are the one that I love and that I want to have an ongoing relationship with. And doing that and keeping monogamous relationship going is really hard. It is really hard, especially in this day and age. But I do think it's valuable.
But you're undermining the whole principle of monogamy.
I totally disagree with you.
But Sheva, you're diluting it to the point of.
So that's where we're going to disagree.
Wait, just a moment. The moment you say that monogamy is only, a moment ago you said that you cannot separate the mind from the body, but that's exactly what you're doing. You're now saying, I couldn't care less if people think about someone else on a regular basis, as long as they're performing with their body. You are, of course, separating the two.
No, I am saying as long as their conscious choice is choosing to be with this person they love.
Let me just finish the point. By saying that you don't care at all whether the person is actually mentally and emotionally engaged with their spouse and being focused on their spouse. And I didn't say that we can't have crazy erotic fantasies about our spouse. But about our spouse, when you say that you don't care whether a man is thinking about his wife, he's thinking about someone else, you are now absolutely separating between the mind and the heart. So in other words, what I'm saying is, why does it then bother you if a husband comes to his wife and says, you are the one that I love, you are the one I'm attached to, you're the one that I've had children with, but it is not realistic that we're only going to be excited about each other. And in the same way, it's not realistic in my mind, it's not realistic in my body either. There's this woman on the side, I want you to have someone as well, open marriage. We will disclose everything. There'll be no duplicitousness. There'll be no lying. What's wrong with that?
Because we've started this discussion with the idea that we're talking about people who are committed to monogamy. So that's the direction that we're talking about, right? We're talking about a couple that has decided that they want to be monogamous.
As a therapist, I'm not speaking about your presupposing commitment. I'm asking whether monogamy works. You're saying it doesn't. You're saying,
oh, I think it works. I think it can work. I think it's very difficult. I think it 100% can work, and we see examples of it all the time. But I think you are making the split by saying it's kind of like it's kind of like, you know, if you get up in the morning, you pray every morning, you know, some days you have amazing prayer and some days you don't have such good prayer, but you got to be there praying every day in order to have those moments of really good prayer, right? So you got to be having regular sex with your loved partner in order to have those wonderful, amazing, intricate moments. But that doesn't mean that every single time you're having sex with them, it's going to be this deeply connecting emotional event, unless you define it as a deeply emotional event by the fact that they're having sex with the person they love. So yes, I think sometimes it's more, it's always everything. And it's not, when you say you're thinking about somebody else, you're still making the decision to have sex with this person and to stay monogamous with this person. So it just feels to me like you're creating a black and white dichotomy that doesn't exist.
Well, and I would say, and by the way, it's good that we're having a spirited debate because there's a genuine disagreement and it's a really important issue. And disagreements are great. They're important. Right now, as you and I speak, somewhere in the cloud somewhere is the Democratic National Convention. And I have nothing against the Democratic National Convention, the same way I have nothing against the Republican National Convention. But as long as they're only like, you know, Zoomed, and I'm not even going to watch them because I love, you know, I've been to live conventions. And anyway, but the point I'm making is
that is a different kind of fantasy.
Somewhere out there's like a Democratic convention, and the Democrats and Republicans hate each other, and there is no communication, there is no conversation. So spirited, respectful disagreement is actually a great thing. So I'm happy that we're disagreeing on an important issue, and people will arrive at their own conclusion. But let me just say, I actually think what I'm hearing from you is, if husbands and wives can fantasize about other people and it can lead them to have more passionate sex, then more power to you. Why not? As long as they're not cheating in their bodies, as long as they're committed to monogamy. I hear you. I actually would say that for women, there is no quicker way to lose interest in having sex with your husband than to see and feel, which you will, that he's not thinking about you, that he's actually totally mentally absent. I think sex like that is going to last about 5 to 7 minutes max. I think it's only about orgasm and climax. I think the wife will feel that the guy is not kissing her passionately. He's not connecting to her passionately. And you know why? Because he's not connecting to her.
Okay,
he's connecting mentally. So you're saying that fantasy can be employed and leveraged to actually create more passionate monogamy. And I'm telling you that any woman who sees and experiences and feels that her husband, her boyfriend, her partner is actually thinking about someone else or watching porn, for example, while he makes love to her, I bet that it's going to kill her libido. It's not going to enhance her libido. It's going to kill her libido.
Okay.
Because she's going to feel used. Okay, your turn.
Okay, so you are creating a scenario which is so black and white. This is where I'm having a lot of trouble. That's not how sex works, right? A person decides they're going to have sex with their partner. They love them. They're starting to have sex with the partner. They start kissing them. They start touching them. They smell their hair. They smell beautiful. They love it. And then their brain floats off for a minute to Angelina Jolie. I'm sorry, I keep using her as an example. And then it floats back to their wife. And then she turns over and they're kissing her back. And then for a minute, their mind goes off to some, like, I don't know, redhead advertisement they saw yesterday. And then it comes back again. They are in the room with their wife. And they want to be with their wife. They're choosing to be with their wife, but your brain free floats. Like, that is how it works. And if we all stop being so hung up on it, everybody would be happier, because the truth is women's brains work that way too. So don't, if they're not talking to you about that, they're not telling you the truth. Like,
no, I understand what's natural. But what's natural
healthy, because
what's natural isn't necessarily what's most passionate.
Like, what you're describing is something.
All these guys I know who look at porn and all that, and they masturbate to porn, they actually think that they're having a great sex life. Little do they realize that they become a little bit pathetic, and women would see them as pathetic. You tell any woman that, you know, she's dating a guy who's a porn addict who would never like even cheat on her, but he looks at an hour of porn. Women lose attraction to men like that, not because they think it's gross and disgusting, which they might, but because they think the guy's pathetic. They think the guy's a loser, that he's a big time loser. So I actually think that we can achieve greater erotic passion. So let me just be clear. Men are the ones who, for the most part, require greater sexual novelty when it comes to.
No, that's not true.
Let me just finish the point.
Okay, but that's a fact that is.
I know. Let me just qualify it, and then we can argue about that too. There's two kinds of novelty. There's vertical novelty and there's horizontal novelty. Horizontal novelty is you need to go to new places and travel all the time because you get bored of being at home, and all of us know what that's like right now, being cooped up with the coronavirus. Okay. But vertical novelty is where you go deeper into the same place. I've had to find out so much more about New York City, New York metropolitan area, because I can't travel right now. First of all, I'm saying cottage for my father. Secondly,
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, by the way.
thank you very much. And there's like amazing things that I never knew. That's vertical novelty. You don't have to fly to this place and that place. You can find so much more about where you are, or what we call a staycation, etc. I feel that that's kind of one of the major sexual differences between men and women. I know women love sexual novelty. I know that we've debunked all the dumb myths that women are not into variety, et cetera, et cetera. But I also think that women are uniquely capable of finding that kind of vertical novelty that men really struggle with. Yes, both sexes want novelty, but women really love when a guy opens up deeper and peels away more layers and opens up more and shows greater vulnerability. And women have great sex with men who are prepared to do that. With guys, you peel off all the layers and they still seem to want just a totally new layer from some other woman. So what I always say to people is, if it's a man who needs to fantasize, to find novelty, to have sex with in monogamy, which, as you said, is challenging, which of course it is, then fantasize about your wife with another guy. Have that kind of fantasy. But don't fantasize about another woman, because your wife is going to feel your absence and you're not going to connect and you're going to have awful, terrible sex.
Okay, I'm sorry. I feel like that's such a simplified, it's not, I'm sorry, I just disagree with that. Like, I just disagree that your husband's mind is going to be floating in and out the same way your mind is going to be floating, you, the woman, sorry, his mind is going to be floating in and out. And the interesting thing here is I feel like part of my job is trying to teach women how to fantasize again, because they have been so shut down. It's so interesting. I have a book coming out in March, Sex Points, and I have a whole chapter on neuroplasticity, because I feel like we have lost in our society, specifically women, but I think men too, because of pornography, the ability to fantasize. Like, learning how to fantasize is critically important if you want to maintain a long-term monogamous relationship. It's just important. And learning how to fantasize in every direction. And that is, I love your idea about
both men and women. You think it's important for both men and women? For women,
learn.
I agree. Listen, I started this conversation by saying that until Nancy Friday wrote her book like My Secret Garden, and
Right.
there were no examinations, there were no studies about female sexual fantasy. We really had so neutered women, we had so sanitized the female sexual brain that we really thought that there is no fantasies. I don't disagree with you on that.
And why do you assume a man? I'm just so curious.
Men are struggling to fantasize sexually. The whole culture,
because they've gotten so used to relying on porn.
The whole culture caters to. Every beer commercial is a male.
Correct.
Every car commercial is a male.
And went to the billboards and the porn, right? They moved it out of their brain into, like, that's where the reliance on porn has really, I think, had men not fantasize so much.
That's
honestly.
A good point. That's a very good point.
But
I think that men who become porn addicts, I do think that they're fantasy.
I think that's a little overstated.
I think they really become so much more monolithic, and they become
correct.
sexual.
I agree with you. I don't call it addicted. I think men have gotten a very distorted view of what sex is from porn. I'm with you with that. I think, and it's not only that, but I think sex education is a nightmare.
A guy who's like looking at an hour of porn a day and like can't stop himself, because I don't know, the experts say that an hour of porn is a definition of an addiction. You don't think it's kind of like an addiction that he kind of maybe even needs, I don't know, to speak to someone?
Yeah, no. So I don't like the word addiction, but I do think it's usually, honestly, a reliance on porn is usually, in my experience, if somebody's masturbating way beyond what fits into their life in any kind of reasonable way on porn, often it's a major anxiety issues. Like, I feel like the same way people overeat or the same way people drink too much, people use porn too much. So, whether you want to call it an addiction or not,
you see it as a dependency, as a coping mechanism.
It's a coping mechanism. In my experience, that's really what it is.
There's so many Woody Allen jokes that are going through my mind right now.
Oh, please share them. Like, which one?
No, he has these. I mean, the moment we start joking about masturbation as a coping mechanism.
Okay, sorry.
Woody Allen comes to mind. No,
But I do think that I want to go back, because there's a tiny thing you said that I actually agree with. So how's that? I agree with the fact that if a guy's having sex because he just wants to get off and he is totally thinking about somebody else, and he gets, they go, they have sex, that it's done. That's terrible sex. That's terrible sex. Forget the fantasies, but it's such a unique and specific case. And yes, in that case, I guess you could say he's using his wife to have to get off. Although in those cases, to be honest with you, he may as well masturbate. It's more efficient. It's probably stronger ejaculation.
The average woman would say to him, his wife would say to him, I don't want to do this. I'm not going to have
But that is not my experience. That's not what we're talking about. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about a sexual experience between a loving couple where their brains sometimes touch on other people, and that's fine, and that's normal.
Oh, I'm not saying that we should like put electrodes on a man and woman's genitals that connected to their cerebral cortex, that every time they think about someone else, they'll get zapped. I mean, we're not talking about taking it to such an extreme, although that would be a pretty cool idea, but I'm not saying that we should take it to such an extreme. I'm simply saying about not even what we should aspire to. It's not like I'm not moralizing here and saying that we should aspire to it. I'm saying what will give us the best passion, the most passionate sex.
So
I think fantasy that pulls us out of the bedroom and out of the marital bed to strangers is actually bad sex. But
I'm so curious why you think it's okay. You think the woman would get, I disagree, but you think the woman would get turned off if she thought her husband had been thinking about somebody else, but you don't think the man would get turned off if the wife was thinking about somebody else.
Yeah, there's tons of data that would support that. One of the first reactions of men discovering that their wives are having affairs, which is a devastating discovery, devastating for the marriage. But strangely, one of the first reactions on the part of men who discover that is to want to have sex with their wives.
And excuse me, it's the same with women.
There's just a
Can
lot
I tell you how many women I see whose husbands have had affairs, and they come in and they're like, I don't know what the hell is going on because I haven't had any desire for like 5 years and we haven't had sex. And now he's having an affair and all of a sudden I want to have sex constantly. I hate myself for it. So it's exactly the same, just saying.
There's a lot of data that would seem to support this notion that men who fantasize about, like, there's a whole genre. You know what? I'm going to leave this for another discussion.
The next one.
I want to leave this for a discussion actually about pornography and its impact on marriages. Because if I start getting into should couples watch porn based on what you're saying, we're going to leave fantasy, we're going to go to porn, and then porn is too big a subject. But there's just a lot of data that seems to show that men can get very excited at the thought of their wife being with someone else, hurt, devastated, destroyed, compromised, humiliated, but excited at the same time. And for women, I'm not sure that it's an erotic experience. I think for the most part, it's a humiliating experience. It can be erotic for some, maybe you would say even for most, but I don't think the data yet supports that. Maybe it will as women become more honest about what they tell researchers. But
thank you for saying that. I just want you to know that I truly appreciate that, because most people wouldn't say what you just said.
So that things will change as women.
Then I think that as women or people in general are more honest about what's going on, the better data we'll have.
True. But I still think that there's a core human nature. Look, there's two things I believe about sex. It's simple, and that's what I wrote in Kosher Sex. I believe we all want passion, to feel completely alive, and I think we all want intimacy, to assuage loneliness. And I think that's what sex is supposed to provide. Sex is that unique thing that is contradictory. It is incredibly passionate while also connecting you to someone on the deepest possible level. So it's like fire and water brought together. The fiery passion of lovemaking together with the watery coolness, the intimacy, the refreshing experience of having someone know you. I think that's why we do it so badly, because we usually have to choose between the two. I wrote Kosher Sex because when I was counseling couples, I felt that they were always making a choice. They either had great sex at the beginning of the relationship and then slowly sex tapered off or died completely, but they had intimacy, they were best friends, or the opposite. They got along pretty well. So they were never that excited about each other, but they saw each other as a good spouse, shared values, good provider. They got married. Sex is a little bit of a bore. They'd much rather watch Netflix. And they never ended up having great sex at all. And there was always this choice that had to be made. And that if you looked at like kings and presidents, and they didn't have to make that choice because they always had two women for two totally different functions. You had one woman just for sex, and she was not pedigreed, and she was the mistress, and it was just about sex. Then you married, someone who was the princess of like France. You weren't that interested in her. You weren't that attracted to her. It was an arranged marriage. You had kids with her, so they'd be more pedigreed. But the idea of having to combine the two into one, the idea that Bill Clinton, who I think is speaking tonight in the Democratic Convention, the idea that he is an outcast from the Democratic Party because he decided that he's going to continue to have two. Hillary for pedigree and children, Monica for other stuff, and the country rejected him as a result. That's a new thing, that we expect men and women to find the lover who's their best friend under one roof. That's a fascinating thing. That's where I feel fantasy can play an important role to bring novelty. I just don't think it should be about other people.
Right. And so what you just described is what I would call, in many sex therapists, I think, the love-lust split, right? You love somebody or you lust the person, and that those can be together, and it takes ongoing regular work. Like, I feel like this is something that gets lost in the shuffle when we talk to our kids and when we raising people in our romanticized fantasies. Having a good sex life your whole life takes work. It takes work and conscious effort and constantly paying attention to the changes in medications and the changes in your health system and your interest level and how much you have been paying attention to each other. All of those things are so critical. But the reality is that you can keep the lust alive if you allow a level of latitude to people, so that their fantasies can float in and out, so that they can imagine, the busty redhead that they don't really want in life. They want their wife, but for just this minute, they're having this fantasy about this, billboard person that they saw. And I think that's amazing that they bring that back to their wife.
No, but I wish you were right that the guy doesn't want that busty redhead. I wish you were right. I think he does want the busty redhead. I'm not saying to marry her, but to relieve his
She's
wife.
an idiot. He thinks he wants her, but she didn't graduate high school.
It doesn't mean he doesn't want to have sex with her. It just means he
doesn't want. Most of the men I know are not quite.
He doesn't want to risk everything to have sex with her. He's not going to risk divorce and
or he met her and
half his assets, the opprobrium of his children. So he's not an idiot. He's not going to do it. That's why he fantasizes. But I actually think it's almost humiliating and denigrating to his wife that he's going to use her body to orgasm. He's using her almost
it that way.
in some masturbatory way. Well, actually, the excitement comes from that busty redhead. But
you are just defining it that way. He's having great, amazing hot sex with his wife.
Would he
and
tell
lots of the busty redhead float in and out.
Okay, should he tell her? Should he say to her, by the way, I just had
that is a fascinating.
Let's say the guy has incredible sex with his wife because he's thinking about this woman that he met that day, and it's amazing. And his wife is thinking, "Wow, what a great time we just had." She just says, "By the way, I was not thinking of you at all. I just want to be honest, thinking about this woman. But thank you so much because your body just made all the difference. But thinking about her and fantasizing about her and seeing her in the eye of the mind is what did it for me." Do you think he should tell her?
I think that you are painting this so black and white. I think that sometimes it makes sense. You can say, "Oh my God, he can tell her even sometimes while they're having sex, like, you are so hot." And I also saw this incredibly hot billboard of this woman with red hair. And that really gets me turned on and thinking about it. That might be one way to do it, or not. We don't owe anybody telling anybody what's in our brains. The women don't owe it to the men, and the men don't owe it to the women. I don't think in the end that destroys the intimacy.
But if we don't owe what's in our brains to our spouse, and I get that. I don't want to live in Orwell's 1984. And why do we owe them what's on our bodies? Why does our spouse own our body? I mean,
because we've made that choice.
Everything you're saying, well, but you're not giving, respectfully, I don't feel you're giving a compelling reason for monogamy at all. If anything, the only compelling reason you're giving is that we made that choice, but you're not saying why we should make that choice.
Oh, so now you're saying why do people?
In other words, I argue for monogamy because I actually think it's what people most want. I don't think it's about religion. I don't think it's superimposed from heaven. I don't think it's because your priest told you you're going to go blind if you masturbate or cheat. I actually think what people most want is to connect intimately but passionately with only one person. I actually think that for all the evolutionary biologists who have told me that people are not naturally monogamous, which they're not, and that want to cheat, and maybe they do, that there's an even deeper nature where however much their hormones dictate some of their actions, that there is a soul, there is a spirit, there is a conscience, there is a deeper desire to be passionately monogamous. So if you remember that famous song by the Spice Girls, gosh, I'm going back 20 years, where they said, "Tell me what you want."
What you really, really want?
You really, really want. So that's the whole point. I think monogamy is what we really, really want. So I make the argument that if it's what we really, really want, then we don't want our brains.
So you and I start
and everything. We want to make an effort. But the one question I need to put to you,
in the same place, but we just don't.
I've got to put one question to you if you don't mind, because I feel it just has to come full circle. what to you, aside from people making the decision to be monogamous, since it's so hard, since it's so difficult, since we naturally want to stray, since it's so much work, why make that choice at all?
Because I feel like that's why I said you and I start the road in the same direction. I think in the end, people want long-term monogamous relationships because they want to matter in somebody's life. They want to witness to their life and they want to witness somebody else's life. They want to know that there's somebody who has their back. They want to have somebody that they travel through life with who they know is there with them. And that you can call that intimacy. I think that is intimacy, although some couples manage to do without intimacy. And I think in the end, that is so important and people want that so badly. And I think that's amazing. But I also think that a way to keep that going, which is really hard, is to have regular sex with the same person. Because if you're not having sex with the person, you become roommates. And so whatever
I definitely agree on that. Yeah.
Correct. But all I'm saying is that having your mind think about other people sometimes when you're having sex is not like, it doesn't change I don't believe it changes.
No, we're not talking about sometimes. We all agree.
But that's what we are talking about. That's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about that.
But we're talking about giving people the mechanisms by which to have erotic passion within monogamy. And I think that regularly employing thoughts of others, especially for the guys, especially for the husbands, employing the images of other women. First of all, I think it's a cop-out. Secondly, I think it's going to lead to really bad sex. Third, I think it's going to lead to resentment on the part of wives. I think it's going to lead to anger. I think the average woman. Let me ask you this, if you don't mind.
What do you mean by regularly? And then
I
know you went really long with Brett.
I want to put one.
But I'm exhausted, and I only have 5 more minutes. Can we just go 5 more minutes? And I'm happy to have this conversation another time, but I really do need to go.
Sure. But let me ask you this question, if you don't mind. Do you think the average? Let's speak about men now. The average guy who's thinking about another woman while making love to his wife. Do you think his wife knows?
No. I think no. Sometimes maybe, usually not.
Okay.
I know you think she does. I know I've heard you say that twice now. I don't actually think so. But again, I feel like you're making such a weird, like, you're building the scenario of this guy who's thinking exclusively about somebody else, has 5 minutes of sex, is using the woman to have an orgasm. That just is not the reality of sex lives of the people that I know. That is just, yes, in that case, I would agree with you. That's gross. That's disgusting. But that's what I'd call seizure sex. And the women are going to be unhappy whether or not he's thinking about somebody else, right? That's just, climbs on top, has a seizure, and then he's done. That's just, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about sex, which is erotic and hot. And yes, that does mean that sometimes people are going to be thinking about other people for part of the time. And that's just the reality. And I think the more we say, don't sweat it, doesn't mean your husband doesn't love you to pieces. And it doesn't mean your husband doesn't want to be having sex with you. It's just normal. The better it will be for everybody. And you know what? It's normal if you think about other guys sometimes too, because you know what? Sometimes you want to have sex with this man. You love this man. You haven't had sex for a while. You want to have sex, but you know what? You're not really that turned on. And when you think about the fireman who you happen to see up the block, I don't know what it is with women and firemen, but that turns you on. Because don't say, hey, go for it and have fabulous sex with your husband. You will be happier. He will be happier and the relationship will be better.
You make me regret that I became a rabbi rather than a fireman.
Yeah, you should be. What can I tell you?
Notice
never too late.
No one ever says that they're having fantasies about the clergyman. It's always the fireman. It's always the.
But I'm not sure that's actually true, but it is the fireman.
No, the fireman. I don't know. There's like I see the fireman calendars, probably there's cop calendars. Okay, now people.
There is something about the fireman, but I think that's the rescue. I think women have rescue fantasies. We could talk about that another time too.
Maybe it's the fireman. It's like the passion incarnate. They even have the word
fire.
Their profession.
The water and the fire, like you said, the water and the fire. All right, sir.
Well, thank you for being with us so late. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I have a book coming out in March. Yes, you can have me back to talk about my book.
Let's talk about your book. Please.
So you can have me back. I'll come in another time.
Oh, I know, but just tell us what it is.
It's called Sex Points, and it uses basically a baseline questionnaire for women to figure out what exactly is not going right in their sex life, because for most women it's a seriously confusing issue. And then it has lots of very concrete ways to make things better, both medical, but physical, physiological, psychological, fantasies.
I'm all in favor of fantasies. I just think that we can have incredibly hot, erotic, insane fantasies about our spouse. But
You could do that too. That is amazing. Why are you suggesting that you can't, that I'm suggesting that you can't do that? That's not fair. I think you could totally do that.
I know that you believe that and that you advocate for that. And
Okay.
You probably prefer that.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I think it's super, super helpful, but I just think that it doesn't always work. And we want people to keep having sex.
Look, but Sheva, there exists the possibility that in some of the things that I said tonight, I may have been wrong, but since it's never happened before in my entire life, it's a very remote possibility.
I would love to be the first. Lila Tove, thank you so much for having me.
My daughter Chana has told me so much about you, and she's such a fan of yours. And now
I adore Chana, and she has a sex toy shop in Yerushalayim now. Amazing, right?
Well, she opened one in New York too, but then COVID-19 killed her. But I don't like the word sex toys because I think it trivializes something that's actually that can be very gratifying to a couple. I don't know. There's no good word for it.
Okay, can I say? I'll tell you what. If you ever want to have me back, my PhD thesis was done on the vibrator use by women. That is a whole fascinating topic, which we could talk about.
Oh my gosh, we should have you back tomorrow to talk about that. We should have talked about that tonight.
In a few months.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that you wrote a PhD thesis on vibrator use by women. Wow. Gosh, and who says that academia can't be hot and steamy? Oh,
yeah, I was laughing. You said you wish you had gotten into an environment. You could have been a sex therapist.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
I'm still trying to figure out who I am, but identity questions, they're always critical. Thank you very much, Batsheva. God bless you. And people can find you on the web. Tell us again. Dr.
Batsheva, DrBatsheva. And I still tell everybody they should go back and watch your interview with Brett Stevens. It was way better than this one.
Oh, this was fantastic. Thank you very much. God bless you, Batsheva.
Laila Tov.